So right off the top, we're watching this and this region here at my feet. You know, against the backdrop of fragile peace negotiations, Iran says its forces shot down a U.S. Reaper drone. Now, this follows, of course, the U.S. military conducting what they call self-defense strikes on Iranian forces that Iran now calls a grave violation of the ceasefire. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the deal and the impacts.
It's going to take a couple days to settle on even down to the disagreements over a word, sentence. So we'll have to work through that. If there's going to be a deal, we're going to have to work through that. But this is, it's either going to be a good deal or there isn't going to be one.
Notice he used the same language he used the day before, too. Meanwhile, Iran's supreme leader released this statement on Iranian state television, warning America will no longer have a safe place in the region to establish military bases. By the way, that's not the first time they've said that either. Live now to Washington and CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata. So, Charlie, how can the White House say that the ceasefire holds when we are firing and so is Iran? How do they square that?
Yeah, Reed, laying mines, blowing up boats, airstrikes on missile launch sites doesn't sound like much of a ceasefire. The U.S. military insists it is still holding, at least as far as they're concerned. But you've heard this phrase before, I'm sure, that the enemy gets a vote. And the Iranians say they have every right to retaliate after these strikes. Now, we got this statement from Central Command that reads, targets included missile and launch sites and on Iranian boats attempting to place mines. U.S. Central Command continues to defend our forces while using restraint during the ongoing ceasefire. That's the important part of that. There's also another development that we have to report this afternoon, because there have been some reports that the U.S. Navy has begun escorting commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. Well, we contacted CENTCOM. They said, look, those reports are entirely false. Remember that short-lived Project Freedom? That has not restarted. So in terms of these strikes, officials that I spoke to over the weekend said they called them like preemptive strikes. They saw 2 Iranian fast boats laying mines, and when U.S. aircraft fired on them, that fired up Iranian missile launchers. They were activated, they didn't fire, and they were hit too. Again, this is for force protection. I was told that this is a single event and not the resumption of hostilities. But it underlines where we are right now with the statements coming out of Marco Rubio and the White House, et cetera. There may be diplomatic progress or not, but U.S. sources that I spoke to say the military is ready to respond, and if necessary, on short notice.
All right, so I got to ask you about what we just showed in that full-screen graphic, and that's that statement by Iran's supreme leader saying the U.S. no longer has a safe place for its military bases in the region. That causes me to consider other Gulf nations and how they land when we talk about alliances or allegiance to the United States. Where do you see those chess pieces?
Well, Reed, you said it yourself. We've heard these statements before from the Iranians, and they will continue to use those threats. But I think we have to pay attention to, let's go back to when this conflict began in February, right? I was in the Middle East when this happened, and there was an onslaught of attacks in places that were U.S. military bases or housed U.S. military facilities. So we're talking about Kuwait, we're talking about Bahrain, we're talking about parts of the UAE. So the UAE, to quote that phrase too, they also get a vote in what's happening here. And we know that President Trump and his administration have been working with Gulf allies to try to figure out the next step forward, because the UAE has come under attack. Kuwait has come under attack. Bahrain has come under attack. Something like 14 or 15 Gulf nations in that region, and not just U.S. military facilities, but other areas, even going after, you remember the video, right? Hitting apartment buildings and hotels, et cetera, just spreading this fear. And when it comes to rearming and repositioning, we don't know the capacity that the Iranians may still have. There's somewhere around 50 to 70% of their missile capabilities may still be there. But let's talk about the drones. It's impossible to know how many drones they have left or how many they've been able to restart during this ceasefire.
All right, Charlie D'Agata, thank you so much for that update. We know you're all over this story. Thank you. Live now to CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. So, Nancy, what's the word from the White House on all of this posturing and positioning?
Well, Reed, when I talked to the president over the weekend, he sounded really positive. He said the two sides were getting a lot closer. He convened a call with Persian Gulf leaders on Saturday afternoon to discuss the terms of the agreement as they stood at that point. They encouraged him to sign off on this deal. But since then, White House officials, including the Secretary of State, have kind of expressed some caution. They say this is going to take several more days at least because they say that it is cumbersome trying to get information back and forth with the Iranians, with the Iranian leaders holed up. It can be difficult to send signals to them and to get responses in a timely fashion. So they are insisting that we shouldn't read anything into any delays that we might see over the next couple of days. But there's another reason for caution, Reed, and that is because as Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, including some longtime Trump allies, started to hear bits and pieces of this draft agreement, they were pretty outspoken about the fact that they didn't like it, notably because it really put off a lot of the questions about Iran's nuclear program to a second round of negotiations after this first memorandum of understanding was signed. Those Republicans said, hey, look, the whole reason we got into this war in the first place was to deal with Iran's nuclear program. Once we open the strait, once we temporarily lift some sanctions or unfreeze some of their assets, what kind of leverage are we going to have over them to force them back to the table to negotiate over their nuclear program? And so that is what the White House is trying to work out right now. How do they come away from this deal, if it is a narrow deal, making the case that this is a win?
So your team also was able to get to us word of a meeting that's planned with the president and his cabinet members at Camp David. Is this what it's all about? Do you know?
You know, the White House says that this is about all kinds of victories that the president has had recently, both foreign and domestic. They're expecting the entire cabinet to show up, including Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who has handed in her resignation but says she's leaving at the end of June. So she is still on the job. They have not said that this meeting taking place at Camp David, about an hour and a half north of here if you're going by car, quicker if you're going by Marine One. They have not said that there's any particular reason other than a change of scenery to head up there for this cabinet meeting, the kind of cabinet meeting that the president typically has here at the White House. And I'm sure you can see behind me, it's kind of a gloomy day, Reed. If that weather holds, if it doesn't look like people can get to Camp David quickly, then they may switch gears and hold it here at the White House after all.
We know you'll have it if that indeed happens in the schedule. But speaking of the schedule, we know that the president was at Walter Reed for a physical today. Some people want to know how his health is. What are you hearing?
Yes. Well, the president has spoken. He said that it was a perfect 6-month physical, as he put it. He was at Walter Reed Army Medical Center for about 3.5 hours. He says it went well. The White House says that we should get more details, usually in the form of a letter from his doctor, sometime in the next 24 hours or so.
All right, Nancy Cordes with all the updates at the White House. Good to see you. You have a great day.